Long ago, in the rugged land of Epirus, there was a grove unlike any other. At its heart stood a mighty oak tree, ancient and vast, with branches reaching high into the endless sky. The people believed this oak was no ordinary tree. They said the voice of Zeus himself lived within its leaves, carried by the wind and revealed in every whisper. When the branches stirred and the leaves rustled, messages from the divine were heard. Travelers came from distant lands to stand in its shade and seek answers. Kings, queens, and humble farmers all gathered here with questions of fate and hope. This was Dodona, one of Greece's most sacred oracles, older even than Delphi. There were no grand temples, no golden statues, only sky, earth, and the voice of the oak. Women known as the Pleiades, or doves, listened to the sounds of leaves and wind. From those whispers, they spoke the guidance of Zeus to those who asked. Dodona was a place of silence, faith, and listening, where the living oak carried divine words. And so, our story begins beneath the sacred oak of Dodona. Far to the northwest of Greece lies a land that feels timeless, with mountains, valleys, and rivers that carve ancient stories into the earth. This is Epirus, a region where the natural world feels both wild and sacred, a place where silence lingers and the air invites listening. Unlike the bustling cities of Athens or Olympia, Epirus held its secrets quietly, far from marble temples and crowded streets. Its power was not in man-made wonders, but in the whisper of leaves, the flight of birds, and the mystery of silence itself. In this quiet land grew a sacred grove, and at its heart stood a mighty oak, said to be as old as the gods themselves. The people believed it was the dwelling of Zeus, ruler of the heavens, a tree that bridged the earth below and the sky above. Its roots reached deep into hidden soil, touching unseen forces, while its branches stretched upward into the light of heaven. When the wind stirred its leaves, the people said the living voice of Zeus could be heard in every whisper and every sound. Long before Delphi rose in marble glory, Dodona quietly thrived, speaking through nature rather than stone or fire. There were no golden statues or polished columns here, only sky, earth, and the voice of the oak that stood eternal. The people of Epirus approached the oak in silence, listening for the god's message carried on the wind and through the leaves. Some believed the doves nesting high in the branches carried Zeus's words, gentle sounds that revealed the will of the divine. Pilgrims came from near and far, some asking about journeys, others about harvests, and some about the future of their families. Even kings and leaders came, humbling themselves before the oak, hoping to hear guidance from Zeus, the god of thunder. The mountains kept Dodona secluded, untouched by noise, while the valleys amplified each sound of wind, bird, and leaf. For the Greeks, Epirus proved that the divine lived not only in temples of stone, but also in the breath of nature. The oak was a creation of the earth itself, not of human hands, and through it, people felt close to the presence of Zeus. Standing in its shade, they believed they were standing in the very presence of the god who ruled the heavens. To this day, the land of Epirus holds the echo of that belief, where silence itself once became the language of the gods. And so, when we speak of Dodona, we speak of a place where earth and sky met, and a tree spoke with the voice of Zeus. At the heart of Dodona stood a vast oak tree, enduring and ancient, carrying the weight of centuries within its branches. Its trunk was broad, its bark weathered, and its branches stretched wide, as if reaching to embrace the endless sky. To the people, this was no ordinary tree. It was alive with meaning, sacred to Zeus, the ruler of the heavens. Here, Zeus did not speak through thunder or lightning, but through the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. Every whisper of the oak was believed to carry his will, each sound a sign for those willing to listen. What made Dodona unique was its simplicity, a contrast to the grand temples of Greece. Delphi had its marble columns and golden statues, but Dodona needed nothing more than the living tree. The oak itself was the temple, its canopy, the roof, its roots, the foundation, and its leaves, the divine script. This simplicity brought worshippers closer to the sacred, seeing divinity alive in nature itself. Pilgrims approached with reverence, often barefoot, heads bowed, waiting in silence for the wind to speak. Some touched the rough bark as though the tree could pass on strength, while others left simple offerings at its roots. The oak became a symbol of trust, a dialogue between mortals and Zeus built not on grandeur but on listening. The priestesses, known as the Pleiades or doves, stood close, listening to the branches and giving voice to the whispers. The cooing of doves nesting in the branches blended with the leaves, their song believed to carry Zeus's words. Generations passed, but the oak remained eternal, its stories told by grandparents and remembered by pilgrims who returned each year. Even great leaders sought its wisdom. Homer tells us Odysseus once came to Dodona to hear what fate awaited him. This shows Dodona's reach. It was not just local but known across Greece as the living voice of Zeus. The oak stood as a bridge, its roots deep in the earth, its branches in the sky, uniting heaven and humanity. To stand beneath it was to stand at a doorway, not built of stone, but formed by life itself. The oak endured storms and seasons, reminding all that wisdom is found not in noise, but in silence and simplicity. Thus, the sacred oak of Dodona became one of the greatest symbols of the ancient world, forever whispering with the voice of Zeus. Long before marble temples rose in Greece, Dodona was already listening. Its oracle was rooted not in stone, but in earth, sky, and the living voice of a tree. The origins of Dodona are wrapped in myth and mystery. Some say Zeus chose the oak as his dwelling, filling its branches with his eternal voice. Others believe Gaia once ruled here, and the oak carried her wisdom before it passed to Zeus. This connection to Gaia shows Dodona's age, reaching back to the earliest traditions of worship. Unlike other shrines of fire or water, Dodona's oracle lived in leaves and wind. It was born from the belief that the natural world itself carried divine presence. Poets wondered how Dodona began, and stories rose to answer. Herodotus tells of two black doves flying from Egypt. One flew to Libya, founding the oracle of Ammon. The other settled in Epirus, in Dodona's oak, speaking with a human voice. It declared this place sacred to Zeus. Priests and priestesses kept the tale alive, saying the doves were divine messengers. In truth, the doves may have been women, their voices carrying the first words of prophecy. To listeners, their songs seemed like bird calls, mysterious and wise. Thus began the tradition of the Pleiades, the sacred doves who voiced the oracle. Dodona was born from story and memory, not from stone. It was a place where gods and humans met in silence. Meaning was not carved in marble, but whispered through leaves. As centuries passed, Dodona's renown grew. Kings sought its wisdom, poets told its tales, and common folk repeated the story of the doves. The myths all agreed on one thing. Dodona was ancient, older than Delphi, older than the great temples of Greece. Its voice was as old as the wind and as timeless as the earth. This sense of deep age gave Dodona power. To stand beneath its oak was to touch beginnings. People felt they were not only speaking with Zeus, but reaching back to the dawn of the world. The oracle was as eternal as the mountains, unchanged through generations. It proved that divine wisdom did not need stone or fire. It could be found in trees, in breezes, in the song of a bird. To the Greeks, this was comfort. The gods were not far away in the heavens. They were here, alive in the world, close enough to whisper in rustling leaves. Dodona began with doves, with whispers, and with the voice of the sacred oak. The sacred oak of Dodona did not stand alone. At its roots, a group of devoted women kept the mysteries alive. They were called the Pleiades, or the doves. Their name recalled the myth of the black dove that declared this place holy. Generations of priestesses carried that legacy. They were not seers like the Pythia of Delphi. The Pleiades were listeners, not speakers. They leaned close to the oak, hearing the trembling of its leaves. They gave shape to the whispers of the wind. Hours could pass in silence, their heads bowed in patience. When the breeze stirred, they listened with full devotion. They read its rhythm, its tone, its flicker of light. Nature itself became divine speech to them. Their words were trusted as translations of Zeus's will. They spoke simply, sometimes only yes or no. At times their answers carried rhythm, almost like a song. The people saw them as more than human. touched by Zeus. Their presence was as mysterious as the oak itself. Later, men joined the oracle as priests. They were called the Selloi, humble and barefoot. They slept on the ground to stay close to the earth. They too listened to the whispers of the sacred oak. Together, the Selloi and the Pleiades formed Dodona's heart. They made silence sacred, and listening itself an act of worship. To enter the sanctuary was to enter another world. Every word spoken there was believed to be Zeus's voice. Dodona was simple, but filled with awe. Villagers came with small questions of daily life. Kings arrived with great matters of war and peace. Each trusted the answers, carried by the oak's breath. Dodona's power lived not in spectacle, but in trust. People believed because they felt Zeus in the oak. They believed because the Pleiades listened so deeply. Their words seemed to echo eternity. For centuries, Dodona thrived in this way. It was rooted not in wealth, but in silence and faith. The oak whispered, the doves listened, and through them, Zeus spoke. The oracle of Dodona lived through the voices of pilgrims who came with questions. Each visitor brought a hope or a doubt and placed it beneath the branches of the oak. Questions were written on strips of lead, tiny tablets buried in the soil of Dodona. Archaeologists later uncovered these tablets, each carrying a whisper from the past. They revealed the simplicity and depth of human hope. A farmer might ask if it was time to plant his crop. A traveler might ask if the sea would be kind to his ship. A woman might wonder if her child would be born healthy. These were questions of daily life, not grand prophecies, yet all were laid before Zeus, ruler of the sky. Unlike Delphi, Dodona welcomed the voices of ordinary people. Here, shepherds, mothers, and farmers found space to be heard. The priestesses listened to the rustling leaves and the cooing doves. They read the rhythm of the wind and gave voice to its meaning. Some answers were short, clear, and final. Others were mysterious, leaving space for reflection. But all were believed to carry the will of Zeus. The lead tablets preserve not the voices of kings, but of common folk. They show faith woven into daily choices and simple lives. Dodona was unique because it was open to all. Not only rulers and generals, but anyone could approach the oak. Imagine the grove, leaves whispering, pilgrims waiting in hushed silence. Every question carried weight, for it was placed before the divine. Even the act of asking brought comfort and hope. Dodona taught that the gods lived in nature itself. Their voice was in the wind, in the turning seasons, in the breath of the oak. The oracle was not about spectacle, but about presence. It was about the simple act of being heard. Those who returned home with answers carried them into their lives. Guidance shaped their choices, their families, and their futures. The oak became a silent companion to generations. It listened to their hopes, their fears, their faith. Every tablet buried in the earth was a prayer. Every rustle in the leaves was a reply. Over centuries, these whispers formed a tapestry of belief. And still, the memory of those voices lingers at Dodona. The oak of Dodona spoke not only to simple pilgrims, but also to kings, warriors, and poets. Its whispers guided those whose choices shaped the destiny of Greece. Homer's verses preserve the memory of Dodona's power and mystery. In the Times Iliad asterisk, Achilles lifts his prayers to Zeus of Dodona. He calls upon the god who rules from the sacred oak for strength and favor. Even the greatest heroes looked to Dodona for guidance. The battlefield was not the only place fate was decided. Beneath the oak's branches, destiny was whispered in the wind. Odysseus, too, sought answers at Dodona in the Times Odyssey asterisk. After storms and trials, he longed to know if he would find safe return. He asked if Zeus would grant him peace after his wandering. The oracle's presence in Homer proves its ancient renown. If poets gave Dodona to their heroes, it meant the world believed in its truth. Kings also sought Dodona's wisdom before campaigns and wars. They came with offerings, asking if victory or ruin awaited. Others asked if alliances would hold or journeys succeed. Dodona answered all with the same sacred rustling of leaves. The oak's whispers were believed to carry the will of Zeus. Power or rank meant nothing before the voice of the divine. Dodona's strength lay in its impartial voice of fate. Shepherds and kings alike received the same truth. A ruler was humbled when he stood barefoot at the oak. The tree did not bow to crowns or swords. All were equal before the voice of Zeus. That equality gave Dodona its great mystery. A king who left carried not only prophecy but humility. Decisions shaped by Dodona rippled through wars and voyages. Sometimes the silence of the grove spoke louder than words. Kings learned the art of listening under its branches. Through Homer and history, Dodona's memory grew eternal. It was a place where the humble and mighty knelt alike. The oak of Zeus whispered and leveled all in its shade. It reminded Greece that destiny was greater than power. The will of the divine lived in the rustle of leaves. Dodona became not just a shrine, but a symbol of truth. It symbolized the shared humanity of all seekers of fate. Beneath its branches, even kings became listeners once more. High in the branches of Dodona's oak, more than the wind carried meaning. Doves, gentle messengers of the skies, added their voices to the mystery. Their soft coos were believed to carry the wisdom of Zeus. Travelers told of a black dove that flew from Egypt to Dodona. It perched upon the oak and spoke in a human voice. The bird declared that Zeus would make the grove sacred. Some saw this as the true origin of the oracle itself. Others believed the dove symbolized peace and divine wisdom. Priests and priestesses listened not only to the rustle of leaves, they also listened to the murmurs of the doves in the branches. Together, wind and bird created a harmony of fate and faith. Pilgrims stood beneath the oak, ears tuned to the chorus above. To them, the coo of a dove was the voice of Zeus. Poets celebrated this union of nature and prophecy in song. The doves became living symbols of communication with the divine. The priestesses were even called the Times Pleiades asterisk, or the doves. Like the birds, they carried the will of Zeus to the people. They listened in silence and turned whispers into guidance. At Dodona, every sound was a message waiting to be heard. The divine spoke not in thunder but in gentle voices. Travelers across the Mediterranean marveled at this sacred chorus. The black dove's legend endured, reminding all of Dodona's uniqueness. Unlike marble temples, this shrine was alive with leaf and wing. The oak was its temple, and the sky its roof. Each sound in the grove was sacred, each note divine. Stillness was required to hear the truth hidden within. Even kings had to quiet their hearts to understand. The oracle was never shouted. It was whispered in nature's song. Here, prophecy was a lesson in patience and humility. The doves taught wisdom through gentleness and grace. The oak taught strength through silence and endurance. Together, they shaped Dodona into a sanctuary of eternity. The voice of Zeus was not only in thunder above, it was in the harmony of leaf, dove, and wind. Those who listened carried home more than an answer. They carried the truth that divinity often speaks in whispers. And sometimes, the softest sound can shape the greatest destiny. At the heart of Dodona's mystery were the men and women who listened to the oak. They were bridges between human and divine, interpreters of Zeus's whispers. Without them, the rustle of leaves was only sound, not prophecy. With them, every murmur became a message of fate and destiny. The earliest guardians of Dodona were priests called the Selloi. They lived in simplicity, sleeping on the earth and leaving their feet unwashed. This was not neglect, but a sign of humility and purity. By rejecting comfort, they remained close to earth and close to Zeus. It was believed his voice traveled through soil into the sacred oak. The Selloi listened with their ears, their hearts, and their spirits. Pilgrims came with questions, and the priests knelt beneath the tree. They touched its roots, opened their hearts, and spoke the god's will. In time, priestesses joined them, known as the Pleiades, or the doves. Like birds of the grove, they carried messages between heaven and earth. Their voices gave shape to the whispers of wind and leaves. They spoke in poetic tones, offering answers wrapped in mystery. Travelers described them as women of wisdom and deep insight. They knew how fear shaped questions and hope shaped answers. Their voices carried compassion, reminding seekers that even fate has warmth. Pilgrims came with questions of love, harvest, and war alike. The priestesses listened to all with equal patience and care. For Dodona welcomed kings and shepherds as equals beneath the oak. Their responses were layered with meaning, open to reflection. Seekers had to search within to find the true answer. Dodona did not command it, guided gently. Like a stream, it asked each heart to listen as deeply as the priests did. The Selloi and Pleiades devoted their lives to this calling. Their temple was the oak, their scripture, the wind itself. At dawn, they tended the grove with quiet reverence. At night, they opened their souls to whispers of the divine. They lived not for wealth or power, but for listening. They did not speak for Zeus, but allowed Zeus to speak through them. Dodona grew known not as a place of fear, but of communion. It was a sanctuary of quiet strength and gentle wisdom. The priests and priestesses embodied this stillness for all seekers. Perhaps this was Dodona's greatest lesson to Greece and beyond. The voice of the divine is not locked in marble or books. It is alive in the rustle of leaves and the call of doves. It is alive in earth, in wind, and in those who listen. Through the Selloi and the Pleiades, Zeus's whispers were heard, and through them, Dodona became not just a shrine, but a living voice. At Dodona, rituals were quiet and steady, unfolding like the seasons. Pilgrims arrived with reverence, knowing the oak itself was the altar. The Selloi welcomed them barefoot, clothed simply, showing humility. They believed wisdom came not from wealth, but from open hearts. Offerings were simple: barley, water, and garlands left at the roots. These gifts were not meant to dazzle, but to honor divine harmony. Sound played a sacred role in Dodona's ceremonies. Bronze cauldrons rang with soft tones that blended with the oak's whispers. The music seemed like a dialogue between earth and sky. Nearby springs offered water for cleansing before questions were asked. Pilgrims washed hands and faces, readying soul as well as body. Each drop was a promise of clarity, a symbol of renewal. The Selloi lived close to the ground, never washing their feet. They believed earth itself carried divine wisdom through constant touch. They read signs in rustling leaves, birds, fire, and trembling soil. Each sound and motion was a syllable in Zeus's great language. Many pilgrims left tablets or strips with questions carved on lead. They asked about harvests, journeys, family, and matters of love. These questions were deeply human, yet lifted into sacred space. Together, people waited in silence beneath the tree's vast canopy. They listened for the wind to stir, sharing hope and trust. The grove united strangers into a community of seekers of truth. Seasonal festivals brought songs that honored growth and harvest cycles. Music, prayer, and silence wove into patterns as old as time. Dodona's rituals never tried to control or demand from the gods. They taught patience, respect, and listening to life's deeper mysteries. Every offering and whisper joined the dialogue between earth and heaven. The oak became not just a tree, but the voice of Zeus. Its rustling carried answers that guided mortals for generations. At Dodona, the divine was never far away, but alive in the rustling of leaves and the flight of birds. The sacred oak was a vessel of communication, a bridge between Zeus and humankind. Nature itself was the scroll upon which the gods had written their will. The Selloi trained themselves to hear what others overlooked. For them, the rustling of the oak was not noise, but sacred language. A sudden gust might speak urgency, while a soft ripple promised peace. A long shiver of leaves could signal change, waiting to come. Each sound was a syllable in Zeus's mysterious conversation with the world. Birds also carried divine messages across the skies of Dodona. Their flight, their cries, and their timing were read with devotion. A soaring bird might bring promise of victory or approval. A darting shadow close to the ground could warn of danger. Zeus's will seemed painted in feathers, in wings stretched against the sky. The priests and priestesses listened not only with ears but with hearts. They attuned themselves to wind, water, and wing, finding patterns of meaning. To them, silence was never empty but filled with hidden signs. Pilgrims marveled at this, seeing the world as sacred anew. They left not only with prophecy but with sharpened perception. The rustle of leaves on the road home became a voice. A bird's call at dawn turned into a whisper of guidance. The voices of nature offered comfort in times of uncertainty. A farmer might trust the stirring leaves to bless the harvest. A traveler might watch a bird's flight and trust the journey. Even kings listened humbly, yielding their choices to greater forces. Dodona's power lay not in grandeur, but in its simplicity. It showed that golden temples were not required to hear the gods. The divine was near, alive in breezes and the smallest sounds. Modern life often drowns these voices in constant noise, but Dodona teaches us the value of stillness and listening. Perhaps the oak still whispers if we are willing to pause. Perhaps the birds still carry messages for attentive hearts. The voices of nature remain a living invitation for seekers. Wisdom still flows, not from stone, but from the song of the earth. Every journey to Dodona began not with footsteps, but with longing. Pilgrims came from villages, islands, and distant lands, each carrying questions. The oracle was a beacon of hope, where even the smallest voice was heard. The path to Dodona was long, crossing mountains, valleys, and rivers. Travelers whispered their questions along the way, shaping them like prayers. By arrival, their words carried both hope and worry, polished by the road. The oak awaited them, silent yet alive, its leaves shimmering like whispers. The Selloi welcomed each traveler with calm and humble presence. Kings and farmers stood equal beneath the branches of Zeus's oak. Questions revealed the story of humanity in all its fragile beauty. Farmers asked about harvests and the fertility of their fields. Sailors sought guidance for safe winds and steady seas. Many asked about love, marriage, children, and lasting bonds. Kings inquired about wars, alliances, and the fate of nations. Leaders sought wisdom for justice, balancing mercy with strength. At Dodona, all questions, great or small, were honored the same. The ritual of asking carried as much weight as the answer itself. Pilgrims purified its springs, washing away dust and quieting their hearts. They laid offerings of grain, garlands, or oil at the oak's roots. These gifts showed humility, a reminder that wisdom was received. Some spoke aloud, their voices trembling but filled with trust. Others etched their questions onto lead and placed them at the tree. Each question joined a silent chorus of human longing and hope. The Selloi listened to words, but also to wind and birds. They wove signs of nature into answers for those who asked. The oracle's replies were brief, sometimes cryptic, yet deeply meaningful. They did not dictate fate, but pointed toward harmony and order. What mattered most was not certainty, but the sense of connection. To ask at Dodona was to believe the divine truly cared. Pilgrims left lighter, not because the future was fixed, but guided. A farmer returned with renewed hope to tend his fields. A sailor set sail with courage, trusting the winds of Zeus. A couple left hand in hand, believing their love was blessed. Dodona was more than prophecy. It was a mirror of the soul. The oak reflected human hopes and fears with timeless wisdom. Each question asked became part of the eternal dialogue with the divine. The sanctuary of Delphi had weathered storms, wars, and endless generations. Through it all, its sacred flame never dimmed, a symbol of Apollo's enduring light. Pilgrims still came, walking winding mountain paths, carrying questions deep in their souls. Some sought guidance for their people, while others longed for hope in their personal lives. Every visitor carried with them a reverence that stretched beyond borders and time. The oracle remained the voice of Apollo, though her tone had softened through the years. No longer bound to kings and conquerors, her words touched hearts more than empires. The laurel-scented chamber echoed with voices that felt both human and divine. Apollo's wisdom came gently, not as thunder, but like music carried in the air. The visions she shared were not of grand battles, but of quiet understanding. A farmer was told to find patience with the earth instead of seeking riches. A mother was reminded to cherish the love hidden in her child's laughter. A traveler was guided not toward distant lands, but toward peace within himself. Delphi had transformed from a throne of destiny to a sanctuary of reflection. The priests sensed this change and shifted their words from power to balance. The temple bells still rang, but their tones sounded softer, like a gentle song. The sacred flame was no longer guarded by fear, but kept alive with devotion. Visitors came not just for prophecy, but to find stillness and rest for the heart. The land around Delphi blossomed, springs flowing clear and olive groves thickening. Shepherds whispered thanks to Apollo, who guided even the stars with his music. The mountain, once a stage for legends, now stood in silence and serenity. Some said Apollo still returned, not in radiance, but in a breeze that hummed. His laughter was heard in leaves, his warmth felt in stone under the hand. Delphi was no longer a place of fear, but a place of remembering and being. The oracle's fame shifted from power to wisdom, teaching prophecy as presence. It was no longer about control, but about listening deeply to the quiet within. Pilgrims returned not with commands, but with stories to remind them of themselves. Even as time moved on, the sanctuary remained, steady in its luminous spirit. Empires rose and fell, languages changed, but the mountain song never faded. The eternal flame burned as connection, not dominance, glowing with quiet strength. People gathered not always for prophecy, but for the sense of belonging it gave. The flame was not only Apollo's gift, but a light carried within each heart. It was a legacy of wisdom, a reminder of humanity's bond with the divine. And so Delphi lived on not just in stone and myth, but in the soul of all who listened. Far to the northwest of Greece lay a grove unlike any other, where whispers floated on the wind. This was Dodona, the most ancient oracle of Zeus, hidden in the land of Epirus. Unlike the marble sanctuaries of other gods, Dodona's heart was a living oak tree. Its roots stretched deep into the earth, and its branches reached high toward the sky. Pilgrims believed that Zeus himself spoke through the rustling of its sacred leaves. Priests and priestesses cared for the grove, not with fire or spectacle, but with listening. They sat beneath the oak, ears tuned to the wind, awaiting the faintest sound. When leaves trembled, they heard not noise, but the divine voice of the King of Gods. The questions carried to Dodona were as varied as the souls who arrived. A warrior might ask if he should march to battle, his heart heavy with doubt. A farmer prayed for rain to bless the fields before harvest time came. A mother asked if her child would grow strong and live a good life. The answers were never thunderous commands, but gentle whispers of guidance. Dodona's beauty lay in its simplicity, free of gold or marble halls. Nature itself carried the messages, bridging mortals and the immortal Zeus. The oak spoke through trembling leaves touched by unseen air, never by lightning. In Dodona, the gods felt close, woven into earth's quiet rhythms. Pilgrims left not only with prophecy, but with peace in their hearts. Legends claimed the oak had been chosen by the earth itself for Zeus. Some said doves perched in its branches, carrying songs as sacred signs. Others swore the ground beneath the oak hummed with the world's heartbeat. Whatever the truth, awe filled the grove. Born of silence and mystery, the priests of Dodona valued patience, teaching that true devotion was listening. To hear Zeus's voice, one had to quiet the soul and welcome stillness. Answers often reflected truths already hidden within the seeker's own heart. Thus, Dodona was not only prophecy, but transformation for those who came. A warrior might hear restraint instead of glory in the leaves' soft murmur. A ruler chasing ambition might be reminded of humility by the oak. A worried family could find peace in the branch's gentle rustle. Even kings knelt beneath the oak, equal before Zeus's sacred whispers. The grove taught that the divine spoke to all with sincerity, not rank. Through centuries, Dodona endured, its strength rooted deep in living earth. Temples of stone crumbled with time, but the oak stood and whispered on. Its message was clear. Wisdom comes not in thunder, but in stillness. To listen was to believe, and to believe was to carry the whisper within. Beneath the oak of Dodona, the whispers of Zeus moved through the leaves, but alongside his voice was another presence, quiet and steady. It was Dione, goddess of harmony, who shared the sacred grove with Zeus. Zeus was the thunder, the power, the voice of command. Dione was the calm, the compassion, the reminder that wisdom is also kindness. Together, they created a sanctuary of guidance and comfort. Dione was often described as motherly, a figure of nurture and healing. Her role in Dodona was not to command, but to soothe the spirit. Pilgrims burdened with fear found peace in her presence. Only then could they approach the mighty voice of Zeus with courage. Priests taught that Dodona spoke with two voices. The oak carried both the firm and the gentle, the commanding and the comforting. To listen closely was to hear not one, but both. A trembling traveler would hear Zeus in the leaves, but the stillness of the grove, filled with Dione's spirit, gave him peace. Together, they spoke to both the mind and the heart. Dodona was not only a place of prophecy, but of balance. Zeus reminded mortals of strength and responsibility. Dione reminded them of tenderness and care. Without one, the oracle would never be complete. Legends told of Dione appearing in dreams. She came not in blinding light, but in a gentle glow. Her presence reassured, like water flowing through the oak's roots. Hidden, but essential to the life of the grove. This duality gave Dodona its unique character. Unlike Delphi, which shone with Apollo's brilliance, Dodona held a keener wisdom, softer yet just as deep. Here, prophecy was not only about action, it was about understanding and about balance. It was about listening to strength and gentleness together. Pilgrims left Dodona carrying not only answers, they carried a sense of wholeness, embraced by both deities. The grove healed something within their souls. Poets wrote that Dione's voice was the breath between leaves, the pause in the wind, the stillness after sound. Zeus spoke in the rustling branches. Dione spoke in the silence that followed. Generations passed, yet their harmony endured. The oak still whispered, carrying both command and compassion. Those who listened carefully heard both voices. Zeus, the sky's command. Dione, the earth's embrace. Dodona reminded mortals that true wisdom is not one voice, but two. Strength without compassion becomes harsh. Compassion without strength becomes fragile. Together, they formed harmony. And in that harmony, humanity found its path. Pilgrims turned back to see the oak swaying. They felt they carried not only Zeus's guidance, but also the quiet blessing of Dione. Dodona lived on as a place of thunder and stillness, a place where divine voices joined in one eternal truth. The sacred oak at Dodona was more than a tree. It was a witness to centuries of questions, prayers, and whispers carried by the wind. Its roots stretched deep into the earth, holding the weight of countless generations. Leaves trembled at the voices of kings, poets, and shepherds alike. In its prime, Dodona became a beacon, drawing travelers from across the Greek world. The oak was seen not just as nature, but as a bridge to the divine. With time, other sanctuaries rose, and Delphi gained greater fame. But Dodona's voice did not vanish. It softened into a lasting echo. Priests and priestesses became guardians of memory, keepers of fragile tradition. They told stories of doves resting in the branches, symbols of divine speech. They remembered bronze vessels ringing like thunder, echoing through the grove, even as fewer sought its counsel. Dodona's name lived on in legend. Poets carried its memory. Travelers spread its stories far beyond Epirus. The oak became a symbol of connection between earth, sky, and destiny. In time, the oracle grew silent, but the spirit of the oak endured. Its whispers lived on in poetry, in memory, in the rustle of trees everywhere. Dodona teaches us that wisdom is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it comes gently, hidden in wind, in silence, in patient listening. The story of Dodona is not an ending, but a continuation. The oak reminds us that sacredness often rests in the natural world. When we hear the wind stir branches today, we may recall Dodona. We may remember how once people believed Zeus spoke through the leaves. Perhaps in that moment, we too feel connected to something greater. The oak no longer speaks prophecy, but its legacy whispers still. Dodona endures in memory, in story, and in the rhythm of nature itself.